Hello, for this video I wanted to record a set of reasons why you might not be making the art you want to be making. And a lot of people can just kind of brush over the fact they're not making art and think they just haven't got round to it yet, or they're procrastinating, or they're being a bit lazy. But actually there are some underlying reasons I find that people aren't making art and it's stopping them. And it's normally to do with some thoughts they're having about themselves and their art, which is stopping them from creating in the first place. So one of the first reasons, the top reason that comes up is I just don't have the time. And that can be valid for many reasons and that can be valid for many people. But when we're talking about creating art, we might not be talking about having masses of time. We can create art and make art in small components of time. So it doesn't have to be a long drawn out process, and it doesn't have to have a lot of time allotted to it. But once we have the idea that we need a copious amount of time before we can start making art, then that becomes one of the reasons why we don't even start making it, because we think, well, I just haven't got the time. And so that's one of the main reasons. And with all of these reasons, there's the reason which sounds very valid, and there's the breaking it down. And then when you kind of bring it to all its components, you think, well, it doesn't completely stand up anymore. But when we have a reason in our mind, we don't always address the depth of it. We just take it as a given that we've had the thought that we haven't got time, so that must mean we haven't got time. And then we don't address it in any depth, and then we don't find out if the thought is really valid or true for us. One of the second reasons is you don't think you're good enough, and you have aspirations to create art and you want to create art, but you really genuinely don't think you're good enough. And this doesn't have to be reflective of whether you are or not. This can just be an inhibition you have, or a thought you've created somewhere along the way in your mind that thinks you're just not quite good enough. And the whole point of making art is to become better at it if you want to be. And so it's not that you come to the table with a talent and a skill set that's already developed and that's why you start making art. And I think there is this preconception when it comes to art, because we're looking at it, we want to see something we are pleased by aesthetically. And when we first start making art, we're not always pleased by what we see. That's the whole point of developing our skills. But you have to come to the table with where you are. And that might mean disappointing yourself when you create art initially. And that's part of the journey. It doesn't have to be this great idea of a piece of art and then it just comes out the very first attempt. And so I think we can set ourselves up by saying, well, I'm just not good enough, and then not attempting, because it's a self-defeating, self-sabotaging way of approaching it. And that kind of follows on to the next reason, which is everything you create has to be a masterpiece. And it completely links into the second reason, which is you don't think you're good enough, which is you're expecting yourself to be creating a certain level of art before you've even dedicated any time to it. And even if you dedicate time to it, the progress might be slow and steady, but it might not be exponential. It might not be exactly what you want it to be at the speed you want it to be. And that can feel disheartening, but that doesn't mean you should stop, and that doesn't mean you should not even create in the first place. But I think with creative ventures, we tend to want to see an outcome we really like seeing. And we kind of like, if we're going to do it, we want to do it really well. But when we start anything new in life, we don't start it very well. We start it very ad hoc and it doesn't look great, and we're learning as we go, and it can look like a complete hot mess. And this is kind of like all allowed. This is all part of the playground of creating art. You're meant to be making a hot mess, and then you're meant to be learning and developing from that mess into something that might be a bit more pleasing or a bit more developed in your skill set. And it's having that space and time to allow for that, and not having such a high expectation on what you should be creating, which stops you from creating in the first place. Reason number 4 is you're waiting for permission. You're kind of waiting for permission from the outside world to say, yes, it's fine, take some time, create art, it's allowed, it's permissible. And you're also kind of waiting for permission from yourself, which you're not giving yourself, because there's all these other reasons why you don't make art, and the time, and that it's not good enough, and it has to be a fantastic piece of art. And you're not really just giving yourself permission to allow for time to be spent creating art and it might just be really bad art to begin with, and that's allowed. There's a level of permission in different areas, and then some people are just waiting for permission to say, we grant you the time to go and do this. And then sometimes it's an internal permission where it's like, I'm allowing myself to spend time doing something I'm not great at, but I want to learn, and so I'm willing to spend this time doing that, and I'm giving myself permission to have the time to do it and it not be like a perfect outcome. And the final one is creative dissonance. And this is where we imagine what our art should look like and what we'd like it to look like. And then we put paintbrush to pen or paper or whatever, and it doesn't look like that. There's this complete disconnect. And that can be really off-putting, because you're thinking, I have these great ideas in my mind, but then when I go to put them on paper, they don't look as great. And now the distance seems so far away from what I imagine that it feels pointless starting, because it doesn't look anything like I want it to look. And from my experience, that creative dissonance can stay. It just remains at times. It doesn't really disappear. I imagine paintings far vivid and greater in detail than that I create, if I'm honest, and they don't always match, and I don't know if they ever will, and I don't think I mind if they do or they don't, because the whole point is I have this idea in my mind, and that instigates me to go and create something, which I do, and then I can develop that idea and that picture and that skill to maybe start matching what's in my imagination. But I haven't matched it yet, and I'm not really thinking I'm ever going to match it, and that's fine, because my imagination is vast and so is yours. So I'm just happy to have these ideas and then get to work in them in reality, and not get put off by the fact they don't match what's in my imagination. And a lot of the times, even in life generally, our lives don't always match what we've imagined them to be, and we work towards what we imagine. But even when we get there, sometimes it feels completely different to what we think it's going to feel like. And I kind of want to really encourage everybody to create art, even if it's not matching up to their imagination, because that shouldn't be a marker or a determinant of whether you continue making art or not, or whether it's not hitting the mark, the imagination mark, and so you think it's not worth doing. And these are some of the areas we're covering in Showing Up for Your Art. And it's like a simple course I've created. It's bite-sized, it doesn't take up a lot of time, but it's really an instigator to acting and get moving and start overcoming some of these aspects. Because I think when it comes to creating art or creating an art practice, there are two components, and I think one part of it is very practical, like finding the time, finding the space to create art, and the other side is quite psychological, which is these ideas we have about why we can't create art, and the kind of pressure we put on ourselves and the expectations we have, and they're the reasons why we don't even get started. So in Showing Up for Your Art, there's 6 components, and most of those fall into one of the two camps, either practical or psychological. There's little mini exercises to do at the end of each video. It doesn't take up a lot of time, but it does address some of these areas, and then it really encourages you to actually start acting on creating art and having an art practice for yourself, which doesn't mean anything grandiose. It's kind of broken down into the smaller segments, and it's about creating a foundation from which you make your art. So if you'd like to find out more, you're signed up now, so I will send you a release date when it's out. And if you have any questions about the topics we've covered today, then you can message me at illustratingrain@gmail.com. And I hope to see you in Showing Up for Your Art. Bye.